Right, Tyrea, here we go. Final push. I'm gonna, for absolutely no reason, cancel that attack and save. Mostly I get...
Whilst Doctor saves viewership, he's just mentioned our D&D campaign, so we don't feel our D&D campaign has gotten as many views as we like. We put a lot of time, money, and effort into it. If you're watching this video, if you like 40k, if you enjoy the chat that we're having today, you probably will like D&D.
Yeah.
Scroll back in the channel, have a go at our D&D videos. We would love for you to see them. We think they're great, and we really appreciate your patronage.
I was watching the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie the other day, and I was just watching it thinking, how have I not yet had a chance as Terminus to do the Pirates of the Caribbean thing where I just fucking walk along the seafloor and fuck people up? Because that's the joy of robots that don't need to breathe.
I got to play a character that once, but enough D&D. Let's pursue our advantage and crush the Eldar.
Let's roll. Go for it.
Eldar rely on stealth and trickery, while others trust in direct force and valor. An ancient and debased people, the aliens only sully their hands in battle when they have no choice. When the Eldar's enemies at last tracked down their hidden base of operations on Tyrea, the Farseer Taldeer turned to a strategy of trickery. In this, she followed the ways of her ancient and deceitful race. Her forces concentrated on a great reinforced hill in a remote frozen area with very limited access. To cut off these access points, the Farseer lured cat's paws to Tyrea. Orks, dissatisfied with Warboss Gorgutz, followed advice whispered by Taldeer's warlocks and camped right where they would screen the Eldar from attackers. The Eldar nevertheless built a substantial force of their own. Advanced webway gates allowed them to ferry troops from the Wraith ship hiding behind a hollow field somewhere in the Kronus system. But these same gates were the Eldar's great weakness. If attackers could take and hold them, Taldeer would be cut off from reinforcements and any hope of escape. Alone and outnumbered, the Eldar would be caught in their own trap by the forces of the God Emperor.
Right.
Some improvisation there, Doctor. How'd you like that?
That was great. I have a question. So when these Eldar are from a craft world, is that craft world like here in Kronus in orbit, or is this literally like that's essentially like the planet they're from, or is this are the forces we're seeing like the combined forces of craft world, whatever the fuck, Earthway?
So, Craftworld Earthway is like an artificial planet. They'll be out there in space somewhere, but I don't think the Eldar would ever risk committing a Craftworld to
because it is literally like a
engagement.
planet, functionally, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And it contains like all the Soulstones we spoke about. So, the combined Soulstones of all the many Eldar who have perished have been stored, basically.
So it's not just like a big ship.
They would never risk that.
Functionally like a planet, yeah.
Oh, yeah, they would never risk a Craftworld in combat. Unless the situation was truly desperate. So, they have a Wraith ship, which is like a spacefaring vessel with all their guys on it, or a lot of guys on it, or guys and girls, because the Eldar are equal opportunities employer.
So not like the Astartes, who are bafflingly, for reasons, all female, all male even.
Yeah, not like the Astartes, but lots of the Eldar Guardians that we face, and lots of the Eldar warriors are female. They're a citizen militia, basically. And some of them are all kind of conscripted to walk the path of the warrior for a time. And in that instance, some of them are male, some of them are female. Same as Tau. Lots of Tau fire warriors are actually female. It's a weird quirk of human biology that men are bigger and stronger in the upper body than women are, and therefore we've done most of the fighting.
I'd say mammalian biology, but yeah. It's really funny, so I used to work, as you will know, on locusts. Locust females are literally twice the size of males and will kick the shit out of them on a regular basis. And you see the same in fish and most of it. Think of female spiders versus males. The females are 10 times the size and will literally eat the males during sex. It's the idea that the males are the biggest and the strongest it's a mammal thing. Not just a human thing, but it is mostly a mammal thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to go on record as saying this on the channel. I think men and women should be treated equally, and that's a good thing. But when it comes to purely physical tasks, frontline infantry, for example, it's more likely that a man can carry someone up a hill to get them to medical attention or lift a heavy machine gun than women can, and that kind of sucks that burden has fallen to men, and simultaneously women have been excluded from that type of work for all of human history. it's a weird biological quirk that has held us back, I think, societally, and that's a shame.
I'm reading a really good, but hard to read book at the moment, just because it's... Like, it's somewhere between, like, reading, you just get somewhere between depressed and just angry. So it's called Invisible Women, and I think it should...
Oh, yeah!
So absolutely required reading for anyone who, like me, is going into, statistics, data science, any fields like that. I think it probably should be required reading just literally for anyone beyond that. But it's really interesting because it's all about what she calls the gender data gap, which is basically, a lot of times, either there isn't data on what women can do and don't do differently to men, or where that data is there, it's all just assumes that the default is male, and then it's like, or is merged between the sexes, and so a lot of stuff is just not known. And therefore deciding with the default assumption of male, it's really good, but it's like literally you read it for like half an hour and you're like, we're the worst, we're terrible, and you get angry just reading it, so...
We are pretty bad. It's the people who say, like, it's like, oh, men and women should be treated entirely equally. It's like, well, there are differences between men and women, clearly, obviously. Anyone with eyes can tell you that. Like, oh my god, that's a lot of Guardians beaming in.
Yeah, actually.
This is beefier than I would have expected. I think that maybe because it's the final one, the game has, like, put more resistance in our way.
I don't think it's that smart.
But yeah, like, it's clear that there are obvious differences between, like, human men and human women, but, like, how much of those differences are societally imposed and how much are due to pure biology?
And it's like, yeah, she makes the really important point that, like, a lot of this is not, like, maliciously designed, it's just the world has mostly been run and designed by men who consider their needs as default rather than different. Like, there's a really good point about, like, transport, for example, like public transport. So buses, for example, are mostly designed with, like, the city centre being the hub, and, like, if you want to go anywhere, you go into the city centre and back out again, because men use public transport for commuting into the city and then back out again in the evening. If you consider it like a wheel, women far more likely, rather than making like these hub and spoke trips, go like around the edges of the wheel. But that just hasn't been included in designs of public transport. Not due to some like inherent like this is a deep-seated sexist agenda, but more just because women haven't been involved in those decisions, or men have just assumed what happens with them is the default. It's all very interesting.
Yeah, in the same way we just spoke about, and like it's not that women are bad at making complicated military decisions. It's just that for most of human history, we were like, yeah, exactly. Like women have never been given that societal opportunity because they're, orcs now.
We're having
this is rough going.
Yeah, having a rough one.
Oh, look at all those boys though. Thule can tear them a bit. Get Thule into the boys.
When I clicked on Thule, for some reason I psychologically expected him to say something Orky, like, I want to get stuck in with the boys. I don't know why, but I expected it.
He just gave up on like his like pious devotion to the Emperor, and it was like, I really want to fuck something up. Stop! It is hammer time. the same voice came on.
I think that's also the same voice as the mega knobs, but it's run through like a digital filter for the mega knobs.
I love like the orc voicing in this game. It's really good. They're funny, but what? This is insane. They don't have any vehicles though. We'll still tear these guys to bits.
I know, but still, it's fucking
Now, if we take the orc camp, we get allied squiggoths.
Oh, that is worth it. Untrained squiggoths. Well, we don't get them. It's just they go wild by the looks of it.
I think
it says, send units to the squiggoth pen to free them. The resulting mayhem will disrupt the enemy. That makes it sound like we don't get them, but they go loose and they'll do things.
That's almost as good, right?
Yeah. The enemy of your enemy is your ally.
The enemy is your friend.
No, he's not your friend. He's your ally, though. And there's an important distinction there, which I feel a lot of stuff often misses.
Yeah, look at recent world history. So, for example, have you heard of the Cold War?
Have you heard of the Taliban and ISIS and Al Qaeda? Yes, the enemy of your enemy is your ally, not your friend.
We're talking about very recent world history. If we're going to do like
well,
Afghanistan,
basically Afghanistan, like the last couple of days, yeah.
Oh, Afghanistan for the last couple of centuries, where people think
True.
it's a good idea to invade Afghanistan and don't realize that like it's basically impossible to hold vast swaths of desert territory. Like you can't do it.
I still get struck by the fact that like parts of Afghanistan were like the southernmost extent of like the Soviet Union.
Oh, it's crazy.
God, the size and scale of the Soviet Union is something else.
I don't remember this being a thing when we were children, Doctor, but you know the Soviet Union had troops in Afghanistan until like 1998.
Yep.
And then the Americans, immediately upon the Russians leaving, were like, oh, we can invade Afghanistan, that'll go well. After like obviously the horrible 9/11 attack, they were like, so invading Afghanistan is a good idea.
Yeah.
And it's like, you realize that like another world superpower just did this, and it ended catastrophically.
Oh, people have been like, there's stuff from like not quite Napoleon's era, but like not long beyond that, where people are like, oh, Afghanistan seems like a good idea, and then like a few years later, like, oh, we've just made a mistake, and it's like this has been happening, as you say, for fucking centuries.
Well, apparently, like a nickname for the country of what we now think of as Afghanistan is the Grave of Empires. I'm sure the British Empire, we tried to impose our will on it, and it backfired wildly.
Yeah, we also wanted that sweet fucking heroin.
Because like we were trying to trade that real hard to the Chinese.
Yeah.
You ever heard of the Opium Wars, Doctor? We fought wars to sell
so
opium.
Horrific. Like just humanity is like, God, we've literally, while I've been holding off against the Eldar, we've just spent like a solid 10 minutes on like why humanity's fucking awful. And we give shit to the fucking 41st millennium where they're like, oh, look at this, humanity's so stagnant and bullshit. It's like, we're not much better now. Ah, God.
Also, our Marines on yellow stands to get outrun their support.
Ugh, you're right.
But let's talk about this particular weird facet of humanity, the Opium Wars. This is where like Britain fought a war against China
because
so
they wouldn't let us sell
opium
to the Chinese. So we're like, we'll fight you to sell opium to your people.
Yeah,
God.
exactly. So the British East India Company. God, that's a hard thing to say when you've had some White Russians. But, like, they were making an absolute killing selling opium to China because, like, I've never done opium, but I'm told it's great.
People, they say it's the shit. Or you go with
they do. It's basically like inhaling heroin, as I understand it, which apparently is real good. And people in China,
you would know, being from the city that has like fucking Europe's highest rates of heroin addiction or whatever the stats are. You'll know better than me.
So we'll talk about Dundee's heroin problem in just a moment. But anyway, like in the mid 19th century, like the British Empire was making a fucking killing selling heroin to opium, to China. And the Chinese government didn't really want its citizens to be constantly high on opium, so they banned the sale of opium in China, which is very reasonable.
And like a reasonable power, Britain said, I'll fucking fight you.
Yes. Like, you would think that like a developed Western democracy in a very recent history would be like, okay, like a sovereign nation has made a decision about its citizens, we'll respect it. But no.
Absolutely not.
So the British government, we invade mainland China. We win because we have superior technology, we have a better military, we beat the Chinese government, and we impose our will on them to be allowed to sell opium to their own people, and they have to abide by this. And in the whole deal, as part of the peace settlement, like we get the settlement of Hong Kong. So I think it was for like 100 years, Hong Kong would be a British protectorate.
Yeah.
And that has only recently been relaxed. And like I'm sure anyone watching this, if you've turned on the television for the last year and a half, you probably know what's going on in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
It's not great as China tries to reabsorb this semi-autonomous region, which was sort of under British control for 100 years. But yeah, all of this like awfulness taking place is a direct result of the British Empire being not wonderful centuries ago.
Why wouldn't you let us sell incredibly powerful drugs to your people? We'll kill you. Fun.
But yeah, the very city I live in, so like the city of Dundee in Scotland, like statistically apparently has the highest rate of deaths by heroin overdose of any city in the Western world. Now,
it was relatively recently was published like per capita like drug overdose deaths in Europe. Jesus Christ, when you separate the UK out into its constituent nations, Scotland is alarmingly ahead in inverted commas.
Yeah, as a Scottish nationalist, that's a somewhat concerning state of affairs.
Yes,
However,
nothing short of a literal public health crisis.
Yes, however,
But at least it's mostly treated as such.
Yes, that's true, and it is. We do take it seriously, but it is somewhat misrepresentative because, like, well, in Rio de Janeiro, for example, nobody's reporting drug deaths.
Yeah, okay, yes.
Like there are a lot more drug deaths per head of capita in Rio de Janeiro than there are in Dundee. The only difference being that, like, in Rio de Janeiro, there's not a robust reporting scheme for public health crises.
There is that, but also that argument to a certain extent does then become the Donald Trump, oh, well, it only looks like the Rona's getting worse because you're actually reporting it. It's like, well, yes, but...
Yeah, no, it's still bad, and we need to address it. Like, it is, as you called it, Doctor, a public health crisis. We have to do better, but to say that, like, Dundee has more deaths per capita by heroin overdose than anywhere else in the world is misleading, because that is not true.
Well, this is the whole point. Invisible Women makes it like, yes, that is the way it appears on the data we have, therefore... Perhaps we should, as well as trying to address the problem, also address the gaps in the data that we have and why those are a thing.
That's a very pertinent point and expertly linked back into our earlier conversation. Look at that.
Yep, that's because this is what I do, because I'm a fucking statistician.
This is you come here, viewership, for like the content from the 41st millennium, watching Space Marines mow down aliens, but you stay for the social commentary.
Someone said, like, and I don't know if I've actually replied to that comment as of this recording, but I'm going to, about, like, oh, it's interesting hearing you and I, Bard, talk about, like, history, because it's so different to, like, how history is taught in the US, and I do want to make the point that most of the historical stuff me and the Bard talk about is not from school education.
Oh, no, definitely not.
I don't know whether your experience is different being in Scotland, but certainly our school education was, oh, the Norman invasion, the Tudors, Henry VIII, something, World War II! Like, there was not much on the fucking atrocities of the British Empire taught in our school. There was nothing. Like, it was breezed over other than something about spices, maybe. It was... While we're perhaps better than America at actually acknowledging that, the British educational system is still poor at dealing with that. Like, don't mistake mine and the Bard's personal knowledge for that for anything to do with the state of education in this country.
I concur with that. Like, Scottish education is not massively dissimilar. Like, I think everybody anyone who studies history at secondary school does the Second World War. Which is probably correct.
We come out of that looking quite good, so of course we fucking study it.
Yeah, but but like, even British study of the Second World War, as we spoke about, it omits how Churchill starved tens of millions of Indian people to death deliberately.
Yeah.
So, like, diverting grain shipments away from India and, like, collectivizing Indian farms culture to feed the United Kingdom rather than feeding India.
Yeah.
So we don't discuss any of that, but we do study the Second World War. I remember in Scotland we did major units on the Scottish Wars of Independence, shockingly.
Shockingly, we did not, which may be a massive surprise to you.
Our greatest triumph over the English, the battles of Bannockburn and Falkirk. So, like, we should really touch on this. Oh my god, like, that's a lot of Eldar, but at least they're dying in droves.
Oh yeah. We'll be fine.
We can just go back to our usual heavy mortar gunline strategy here.
Yeah, I need to get to the Fortress Monastery so I can get the heavy weapons upgrade from the armory, which I can already get. That was just the regular fortress was needed, so once I get to that, we'll be fine.
Brilliant. So, like, we should really talk about the Scottish Wars of Independence. This is like a fact of... I am a Scottish nationalist.
So I want to preface this with, this is something I know absolutely fuck all about, so...
Oh, really?
Because they don't teach it in English schools, and obviously I hate the Scottish, so I know nothing about it.
I know you don't hate the Scottish.
Was it the 5 years I spent there, and the urge I still have to return because I hate myself?
Yeah, the Scottish Wars of Independence were basically like you could call it a semi-rebellion. Like, the Kingdom of England at that point in the 14th century was trying to absorb the nation of Scotland and make it a constituent part of England, which is like... That's what most nations were doing in the 14th century. That was a perfectly natural part of being a country in the 14th century, was like to absorb your neighbour to make a bigger country. That's perfectly reasonable. But there was a series of wars fought where Scotland resisted this English advance effectively. culminating in the Battle of Bannockburn, which is like a major
Sounds
Scottish...
like heresy to me.
a lot of heresy. But a major Scottish victory over what was perceived to be a superior English force, which Scottish historians still brag about today.
Yep.
Which is nonsense, because like we had a year to prepare. So there was a garrison, a Scottish garrison at Stirling Castle, which you can go and visit today. It's mostly intact. It's a wonderful castle. If you ever come to Scotland, visit
I've actually
it.
never
It's
been
an
into
incredible
Stirling
place.
Castle. I've seen it from a distance, and I've been on the Stirling Bridge. And,
It's magnificent. I mean, like
I've
if
also
you've
never seen Braveheart though, so.
I mean, you probably can skip Braveheart.
Yeah.
But like, Stirling Castle is like a truly fascinating place. Like, if you imagine a medieval castle, it looks like Stirling Castle. It's incredible that it's still intact.
Not
and
like
it's been
Edinburgh
so well
Castle,
maintained.
which is very impressive from the outside and gobshite on the inside.
Yeah, Stirling looks tremendous, and it's built on like a raised plateau. It's in the middle of like a field. It's sweeping. It's dramatic. Go and visit it if you ever come to Scotland.
We've vaguely toyed with the idea of moving to Stirling.
Stirling's a lovely place. It's gorgeous.
We've talked a lot about, because we want to kind of eventually move back up to Scotland. We've talked about, we know a lot of people in Edinburgh, we know a lot of people in Glasgow, and there's a lot of evidence for, maybe instead of moving to either one, we should just split the distance and just move to Stirling.
I mean, I could entirely support that if I were you guys.
That works for you as well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, you're also closer to me. But anyway, like in 1313, which is a cool date, there was there was an English garrison still in Stirling Castle. So the English had occupied most of Scotland. There was an English garrison in Stirling Castle, and they were besieged. And the Scottish commander of the garrison, the Scottish commander of the besieging forces, told the English garrison, "Look, you know you're beaten. We can starve you out. All we got to do is wait. So how about if you're not relieved in a year, as in if the English have not come to rescue you and broken the siege in 1 year, you'll surrender the castle to us." And Stirling was the last castle held by the English in Scotland. So if this garrison surrendered, it was basically an admission that Scotland was independent, that they were a separate nation state. England had no further claim on the country. So clearly that couldn't be allowed. So what happened was the English had a year in which to raise an army and march to relieve the garrison that they had stationed at Stirling Castle. So the Scottish military forces under Robert the Bruce, who would eventually become the first king of this new independent Scotland, had a year where they knew an English army was going to come, and they spent an entire year preparing to fight an English army. And then shockingly, when the English army turned up, led by Edward II, who historically is one of England's weakest kings. He was a terrible king. He was an atrociously bad king. It's not relevant to his kingliness, but like he's also bizarrely one of the first canonically that we know, almost for historical certainty, he was almost definitely gay. That's nothing to do with how bad a king he was.
Never married, then?
Oh, he did, and his son deposed him. Like when his son was like 4, he deposed him. So, like, this man's wife allied with his nobles, and then put his son on the throne, and the dynasty recovered itself. But he was a terrible, terrible king, not because he was gay, just because he was a terrible king. It's theorized actually that he may have been eventually Edward II, the king who attacked or tried to relieve the garrison at Stirling Castle in 1313 or 1314. He may have been killed by inserting a red-hot poker up his arse. Which,
I've heard that before.
Yeah,
that does sound strangely familiar. Maybe that's the part of Scottish of history they do teach.
Yeah, which might just be bullshit propaganda because he was gay, and like even his contemporaries knew that he liked dudes, and it might just be bullshit, or it could be true. We don't know. We'll come back to Edward II in a moment, but anyway, regardless, he sends an army in 1314 to fight the Scots outside Stirling Castle to relieve his garrison. They lose because, of course, the Scots have had a year to prepare. We have all sorts of pit traps we've dug. We've marshalled an army. Shockingly, we win the battle that we've been preparing for a whole year, and it's seen by many Scottish historians as this great triumph over the English, even though we had, and I quote, a year. I cannot stress this enough, a whole fucking year to win one battle, and shockingly we did.
That's not only is that the most balanced account I think I've ever heard of that. Well, probably the only, but also, especially from someone with your accent, that's a surprisingly balanced account.
Why, thank you, Doctor. Now, on to Edward II, who's historically a fascinating man, not only because he's one of the very first monarchs that we know was almost definitely gay in England, but there's a play written about his life by a guy called Marlowe.
Oh yeah.
So Christopher Marlowe, he's a Elizabethan playwright who may have been William Shakespeare.
Yeah, I know he's one of the candidates for if Shakespeare wasn't one man or that man.
Yeah, exactly. So it may be that William Shakespeare wasn't a single person. He was like a pseudonym under which many authors published, and Marlowe
Apparently,
may have
yeah,
been...
the sprite is not a fan of that theory for a number of reasons.
I mean, it probably is a bullshit theory, but we'll never know. Like, it's stupid to speculate even, but it's a fun theory. But Edward II does a really, really good play written about his life, and in the first televised adaptation of that play, Edward II, Ian McKellen plays Edward II.
Ah.
So Ian, Lord of the Gays McKellen, plays this first, as far as we know, canonically gay English king, and it's actually the first canonical televised kiss between two men on British television. So there you go. That's a fun fact.
That is really cool. That story took a lot of twists and turns and ended up somewhere completely different to where it started, and yet was a great journey all the way along. Well played.
Why, thank you,
Exactly
Doctor.
what I need, but I'm just bludgeoning through a load of bullshit Eldar.
Yeah, here we are, like back to our game of space elves and space knights, which is what this boils down to.
This is a rough mission. Like, they're really throwing all the bullshit at us, and it's like, we're doing fine, but it's a bit grueling.
It's fighting on two fronts simultaneously, which is a bad idea.
Yeah, hence why I'm pushing through to this thing, which has been put on my map in the hope that shit will get better.
I don't want to spoil
find out.
it. I don't want to spoil it for you, Doctor. It doesn't
Don't
get
spoil
better.
it for me then. Yep. No, that's
So
fine.
actually, let's put it to the viewership. There's actually a dramatic twist about to occur on this very map. Perhaps in about 10
and I'm
minutes
gonna
of
fucking
gameplay.
fall for it. Based on the Eldar Stronghold mission on what's it called, on Soulstorm. I think I know something that might be about to happen.
But before
we'll
you
see.
give your speculation, Doctor, viewership, tell us in the comments, like obviously like retroactively, but pause the video at this point and post in the comments. What do you think is about to happen? We'd love to go as wild as you want. We'd love to see your comments. And I think the Doctor and I, we're going to call a brief break while we go and replenish our stocks of alcohol and nip to the bathroom. But we'll see you back here momentarily.
Sounds good. This is the point to pause and drop down into the comments.
There we go. I just need to get more booze and nip to the bathroom.
I also need to get more bathroom.
There we go. I need to get more bathroom.